Wherever you are around the world, this is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin from FIDIC, the CEO of FIDIC. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the fourth in the series of the FIDIC COVID-19 webinar. We're delighted to have you on board. I'm told by my staff that we have in excess of 1,500 people to register. I hope we can maintain your interest continuous throughout this program. This is one of many seminars that we've held over the last few days. We are running 20. This is number 4. And our plan is really to set this in and to enable speakers from around the world to contribute. So my bit in this particular early part is to do a very quick welcome and introduction. And then I'll spend some time to actually introduce the president of FIDIC and also the panelists, which is 4 of them. Possibly, if we are lucky, we may be able to get one of our board members to join us, Leloup from China. Each panelist will have up to 5 to 10 minutes to say a few words on the topic. And thereafter, after we've covered everybody, I will be able to come back with question and answer. For those who've already attended the previous webinar, it's quite straightforward. I will encourage you to participate at the point where there will be Q&A session where you'll be invited to raise questions, and I'll put it on close to our panelists. Without further ado, I'm just going to say the topic for this one is the role of engineer in delivering of projects. And we are looking at it from the perspective of the COVID-19, the role of engineer in discharging their responsibility, issue to do with health and safety, issue to do with requirement. And I'll be expecting the speaker to talk from their own different business perspective. We have speakers who are multinational, geographical focus, and have businesses across the world. We have specialist people who are SME, but also one particular regional focus. We also have, speakers who are really expert in the world of FIDIC and knows FIDIC very well from our contract team. But also we have people who are legally qualified from different practitioner level. So we have an opportunity over the next 1.5 hours to have a dive in into the conversation on the subject and to be able to address the issue as wide as we can. Without further ado, I'm going to invite, the president of FIDIC to say a few words. But before we do so, I just want to say a few words about those who lost their life in different parts of the world. And those who actually, are concerned by what is going on in the COVID issue. Our sympathies to everybody around the world on behalf of FIDIC. And we hope that you are where you are, safe, and you're looking after yourself. So please enjoy this webinar over the next 1.5 hours. Bill, can I invite you to take the floor? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nelson, and I will try to be brief. I would like to echo what Nelson said right at the end, that the thoughts of everyone in FIDIC and our board are with everyone in the global community who's experiencing this unprecedented problem of a pandemic. Many are suffering terribly, and our thoughts and prayers are with all of you. I would like to personally thank Nelson and his secretariat staff for putting these programs on together. This is the 4th webinar that we have had, as Nelson mentioned. We're doing them remotely. We're doing them with speakers and participants from all around the world. And I personally find it incredible how well they're going so far. The number of participants has been huge, which is telling us that the subject matter that we are addressing seems to be the correct subjects, and the speakers that we've invited and have agreed to help us have been absolutely excellent, as I'm sure they will be today. So thanks to the Secretariat, thanks to the speakers, and most of all, thanks to the participants. There are quite a few of you who are registered. We hope that the next hour and a half or so is of value to you. We certainly work very hard to try to make it that way. And this particular subject is of very much importance to most of our firms, the role of the consulting engineer in this very challenging time. So once again, thank you very much for participating, and let's get on with the program. So Nelson?
Thank you very much, Bill. Thanks for that warm introduction. The right candidate who should be, I think we are struggling. I don't know whether we have Leloup joining us, but I think if it's not online, I want to try and move across, to go to the panelists at the moment. If Lou is not online, then we'll bring Lou in later on to have his view.
I think he is here, Nelson.
Is he actually on? Brilliant. So Lou, welcome on board. I'm glad you're able to finally join us. The floor is yours to address us 5, maximum 10 minutes on the subject. Lou, Vice President FIDIC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelson. Hello, everybody. Under such a severe COVID-19 pandemic environment, I think many participants working at home right now hope it is not so boring and everybody stays safe and healthy. Last Thursday, we had a very good webinar on the contractual issues around the force majeure or exceptional events and the COVID-19 based on works contract. And today, this webinar, we are based on the same background, which is COVID-19, but focus on our consultants, especially those performing its role of engineer under the works contract. I think most audience know FIDIC works contract, especially Red Book, that's a long history since 1957. But for White Book, it is a little bit new, and it started at 1990. And FIDIC newly published the 5th version of White Book in 2017, dealing with the cases like COVID-19 crisis. In 2017 White Book, the clause 4.6 exceptional events has been introduced to replace the previous clauses, which is changed circumstances. And its approach is similar as our works contract. Of course, right now, I will not talk so much about the details about the contract requirements, specifications, because my fellow colleague, Mr. Vincent Leloup, I think he will touch much more about the White Book. Here, I just want to share with you some of my views on the role of engineer, and as a consulting firm and consultants, what we did here in China on this COVID-19 crisis. Even though the agreement, what we used here for most projects is not FIDIC White Book, but the principle is similar. The clause of force majeure is on the agreement between client and the consultant. And the duties and the responsibilities to engineer in the works contract is much more similar. So as for the role of engineer, generally for the role of engineer, I will not mention those duties and responsibilities assigned to them under the agreement with client and specified in the works contract. What my experience is, out of the clauses of the contract, the role of engineer to facilitate the parties to build a cooperative culture for the project. It's my observation, those final succeed projects all had very strong cooperative culture among engineer, contractor, and the employer. Good faith and collaboration is much more important for the project and the business of each parties. Nevertheless, claims always cannot be avoided for any project, but the collaborative culture always need to be followed to well settle those claims. So as for the action taken for the COVID-19 crisis, here in China, we suffered a little bit earlier. Lockdown measures has been taken for Hubei province, and the shutdown measures taken for most of rest cities and the provinces. for the impact on the projects, at the beginning, it is not so critical because that's during our Chinese New Year. But once it lasts longer than our festival, the problem comes. The impact to project is obviously cannot be avoided. I talked to some senior management from large consulting firms which are undertaking many large projects right now. And the feedback, there are a number of actions has been taken for those projects. First, for the consulting firms, many the consulting firms forming COVID-19 crisis task force in the firm and develop guidelines for monitoring the activities of its business and all staffs, and giving the priority to the safety and the health of the employees. For project, generally, as instructed by client, they're forming COVID-19 crisis task force for the project. Normally, it comprised by members from employer, contractor, and engineer. And the engineer leading the development of epidemic prevention management mechanism and the emergency plan for the project, and continuous monitoring the implementation of the plan. So for engineer, also, normally they're maintaining necessary contemporary records because records is much more important. Not only for, let's say, the contractor, also for the engineer themselves. They can use to submit any claims to client, and also they can use these to help them to evaluate the contemporary records provided by contractor in their claim submissions. And at the same time, the engineers continues assessing any impact to the project construction program and keep the client aware the possible delay to the project. Of course, normal, if we review the contract responsibility, that's the contractor takes the responsibility to develop and update the construction program, but the engineer's advanced preparation will help the employer well know the potential impacts to the project, because normally the employers lack of these kind of resources. So I just take this time to share some practice to everybody. I would like to move the microphone to Nelson. Nelson?
Thank you very much, Lou, for that insight into the Chinese approach to resolving it. I'm actually very impressed that, you know, some of the actions being taken in China reflected the view and the approach that FIDIC is taking in terms of, you know, creating an action task group, looking at, you know, specific guidelines, and also promoting the collaborative approach, which I think brings everybody together, from the client to the contractors to the consulting engineer, so that we are looking at a collaborative approach to moving forward. It seems like the right way to go forward because we are all in it. And the idea of record keeping, I think it was said 2 days in the previous you know, seminar, record keeping, I think was record. I think it's interesting to hear that from you, Lou. Thank you very much for that insight. Now, I know that, you know, we've got on the screen, we've got David Brown, followed by Pierre, Verzat, and James Mwangi, and then go to Andrew. But I want to sort of flip it over, as Lou alluded earlier on, to say our learned friend, who is the chair of the contract committee, will probably give us a big dive into the FIDIC contract side. So I would like to invite Vincent now to give us his 5 to 10 minute spiel on this particular issue, and then we can go to the practitioner and put that into context. So Vincent, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nelson. So hi to everyone. I would first of all talk about the role of the engineer in the frame of our FIDIC forms of contract. Then as a second point, I would take you to look at the rights and obligations of the engineer as a consultant under the White Book. The White Book 2017 edition, which is our client consultant model services agreement. And then I would finish with some general consideration. Regarding the role of the engineer, as you may all well know, the engineer is having a very much central role in the frame of our forms of contract. He's got a wide range of powers. First one being the power to give binding instructions to the contractor as to the execution of the works. This is set out in clause 3.3 of the 99 edition of the Red Book and the Yellow Book, or in subclause 3.5 in the 2017 edition. And so, given our current situation, that is particularly salient to matters related to health and safety. The contractor under our forms is having specific health and safety obligations, including the obligation, of course, to comply with regulations and laws with due regard to health and safety, as set out in clause 4.8 or 6.7, for example, of our FIDIC Red Book and Yellow Book. In this connection, so the engineer will have to issue possibly instructions, especially if he sees that some matters which have been agreed, such as social distancing, wearing of a face mask, or use of such sanitizers, are not available on the job site. He will have that power given under the contract. Of course, you have to look at the impact of your applicable laws, because depending on your jurisdiction, you might also have additional people stepping in the construction process. I'm thinking about health and safety officers or inspectors, which are sometimes imposed by law, like in France, but like also in other countries. And we will have parallel duties to the one of the engineer in that connection. Beyond this matter of health and safety, strictly speaking, there is also an important role of the engineer, which is, and it is sometimes a bit forgotten by people, is a kind of first level of dispute avoidance in between the parties, because this situation we are going through will necessarily generate at some point some claims from parties, and the engineer is having a central role in that connection to assess the claims which are being put forward. It's got a specific time for that in our 2017 suite. It's got a total of 84 days from the time of receipt of a fully detailed claim, 42 days first to try to reach an agreement and to broker a deal in between the parties, and if that fails, it's got 42 days to issue a determination which is meant to be fair. So in that particular context, although on a general basis is meant to act for the employer, in that particular context, the engineer has a duty to take somehow an impartial view on the matter. So not being subject to any particular view of either the contractor or the employer, even though the employer is of course paying the engineer. So that's something we always stress very vividly in our form, that despite that fact, despite that dependency in the sense that the employer is paying the engineer, in that particular instance of determination, we expect the engineer to act fairly in between the parties. And that is for the long-term interest of the project, because if you take a biased somehow decision at a certain time, you can be sure that the other party will feel frustrated, and this will only give rise to disputes down the line, hence generating delays and additional cost to the whole project. So that first level of dispute avoidance somehow, and dispute in the general sense of it, not as we define in our form, but that first level of dispute avoidance and the role of the engineer here to try to broker a deal in between the parties and to act fairly is very critical. Finally, also the engineer, if he sees that there are very concerning health and safety practices on site, he's got of course the power to suspend the works in clause 8.8 of the 99 suite or clause 8.9, so that can be borne in mind. If I turn now to his own contract with the employer, and if that contract is governed by the FIDIC White Book 2017 conditions, the current situation can be addressed in various ways. There is not only necessarily one clear pathway for dealing with that. People tend to jump on the conclusion that this is exceptional event situation, and so we should apply the exceptional event remedies set out under the White Book. Be a little bit careful with with that, because in the White Book, exceptional event is defined in clause 1.1.13, as it is defined in other FIDIC forms of contract. You have a 4-step test to succeed on an exceptional event case. And one of the 4 tests is a bit difficult in our context. This is that the party could not reasonably have avoided or overcome the event. We all see across the world that in many countries, construction activities can continue provided that the right health and safety measures are implemented. And that in itself could be a killer somehow for an exceptional event argument. But in parallel to that, because there is not necessarily only one way, as I said, you can have, of course, an approach and an alternative approach to argue your cases. The change in legislation provision in clause 1.5 can be looked at. And don't forget that when we say change in legislation, that does not mean that regulations are out. In fact, the definition of legislation that we give is very broad. It will encompass legislation per se, so an act of the parliament, but also some regulations, some orders either at a state level or very local level. And those changes in legislation, when they do occur and when they affect the way the services are delivered, clause 1.5 expressly mentioned that a variation to the services can then be implemented. And when you turn to our clause 5.1 about variations, then if you go through that clause, you will see that there are various examples of variations which are given there. For example, the way to deliver the services. And a variation per se in our forms will attract a possible extension of the time for completion of the services that is set out under clause 4.4. And there is an entitlement going with it for the payment of exceptional cost. So we have a specific term defined in our White Book, which is called exceptional cost, which can typically arise from an exceptional event such as what we are talking about, but not only. Exceptional cost does not only flow from an exceptional event, that can flow from a variation, for instance. And so in which case there would be cost and time entitlement for the consultant. The consultant also is having the possibility if he fears for the safety of his personnel, that's provided for under clause 3.8. The client also can do a suspension at will or for health and safety reasons, and that's also covered under 6.1, resulting ultimately in cost and time entitlements under clause 6.3. Don't forget the communications notices which are required under the White Book. As a difference with former White Book versions. Notice is a defined term with the capital N, as we tended now to do since the Gold Book in 2008. So that's covered by clause 1.3. Well, that's for the contractual machinery, I would say. Don't forget, of course, to look at the impact of your applicable laws. That goes without saying, but still I say so because it's important to bear in mind, especially for people who have no legal background. Sometimes they tend only to look at the contract terms. And the solution for this kind of situation we are going through is definitely not within the four corners of a contract. It's, I would say, also definitely not necessarily only to be looked at from a legal perspective. There is a more wider view probably to have. More social responsibility view. And we see actions from several governments across the world, which tend, in some instances, to say that, let's say, public authorities, for example, should stay away from a rigid or literal application of their contract terms. Because if you only follow, let's say, a very strict letter approach of the contract and a hardline one, since the situation is affecting all of us across the world, say, for the example of a country, even if you exercise your rights, strictly speaking, that might take to have a lot of companies going into difficulties and possibly insolvency. And there is nothing left to recover from an insolvent business, or very little. And if you extrapolate insolvency not only to one entity, but to several, this has a huge social impact. So hence the fact that some governments are currently saying, we can see that in France or in the UK, they are currently providing for specific terms to be implemented in the frame of construction contracts, such as specific COVID-19 relief regime, and so somehow staying a little bit away from a strict application of the contract terms. So look at the contract, of course, have your provisions in mind, have your rights clearly set out in your mind, plus also your legal rights. But by all means, of course, the exercising of such rights is definitely not the only way forward to handle this situation on a sustainably social basis, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. That was a very quick gallop race through the white book and the various issues. I like the way you started by defining the role of the engineer in terms of health and safety and other roles of dispute avoidance, and even having had to play the impartial role during that process, even they're being paid for by the client. And then you pop on into the white book, the specific clauses that deals with issues about legislation, regulation, and compliance, and even extension of time. So that is very good, an insight to get us started. You close off with the issue about corporate social responsibility and another COVID-specific one, which is from the country, and this is happening all over the world. It would be good at this point if we just move on to David to give us his own view on the subject. And I suspect David's view will be global, but more on legal side of it. And then hopefully we can then amplify that with Pierre and James and Andrew in that order. So David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nelson. And also thank you very much to Vincent for, as usual, a very comprehensive review. He's just left me one or two scraps on the table that I can deal with. And yes, I'll be dealing with these more from a lawyer's point of view, to start with from a dispute lawyer's point of view, because that's what I am. I got into this business 30 years ago, problems with a FIDIC contract with the engineer. Of course, the contractor wasn't to blame at all, as they said at the time. Anyway, looking at this from what does the engineer really have to focus on, looking at the contracts? And I'm looking in particular at the new yellow and red books. As Nelson just mentioned, health and safety. And there are some interesting powers there that the engineer has to look at. When you're looking at the behavior of contractors' personnel on site, look at 6.9, there's an interesting power of the engineer to order the removal of contractor personnel who persist in any conduct prejudicial to safety, health, or protection of the environment. That one may be relevant, although the chances are nowadays that with the various lockdowns, nobody's going to be on site at all, I suppose. From my point of view as a disputes lawyer, I look at several clauses which I think will lead to a lot of claims, dispute board instructions, and arbitrations in the months to come. These are the provisions, first of all, 8.4, extension of time on foreseeable shortage of personnel or goods caused by epidemic or government action. That's one of them. There's an interesting power to be considered of the engineer under 8.9 to suspend the works. And I mention that because I've had that on a case where there's also force majeure clause has been invoked. Then also the change of laws provisions in clause 13 are very interesting. How do these fit in with the force majeure, now called the exceptional events provisions in clause 18? Everybody thinks force majeure, but that only gives a contractor time and not money. So he may want to look more at change of laws, which may give him time and money. There are very strict notice provisions to be followed in relation to these, which the engineer will certainly be looking at very closely as well. Just coming back again, finally, to the force majeure. I know we've already had this in a webinar. It would have been said that epidemics and pandemics are not actually listed. There may be some people trying to say, well, you know, if they're not listed, then they're not necessarily, this is not necessarily a case of force majeure. Not so sure that that is the case at all, but there are going to be some very interesting arguments in the months and years to come over exactly which clauses are to be relied upon and in which way, and the engineer's conduct in dealing with applications and correspondence from the contractors is going to be looked at under a very bright light indeed, I would have thought. I'm saying that because that has been a lot of my business for the last 30 years. But I want to move on to a slightly more positive aspect of all of this, which is that what is very good, I find, about the new FIDIC forms is that they're starting to move away from what you might call a more reactive set of prescriptions and rules for the parties, i.e. something happens, then you have to do something, and you have to do it by a certain date, and then follow that through. But if you look now at provisions like clause 8.4, which is the advance warning provision, there's a very important power there for the engineer to, as well as the other parties, to warn each other about something which may have an impact upon the future performance of the contract. I'm also looking at clause 3.8, which gives the engineer power to call management meetings to bring in the parties and bring in other interested parties, including, for example, other employers, other contractors of the engineer. Now, what does all of this do? For me, it represents a push from FIDIC, which is extremely important to ensure that the engineer is going to be far more proactive. Okay, a couple of months ago, people saw this coming. It's a sort of tsunami of problems that were coming, but perhaps given these new powers and the new attitude coming in, there's a lot more scope for the engineer to really take the bull by the horns and to say, look, everybody, let's sit around the table, what we're going to do about it. Yes, I can imagine new contractor will be applying the exceptional events clause. You might be applying to suspend the works. Yes, there may be new regulations coming in from the government, but that's all very well. But let's try to work together, set up some sort of team, ongoing team to meet from time to time so that we can try to collaborate and to get through this, and therefore to minimize all of the problems that will come afterwards. Perhaps there will be lockdown, perhaps it's not going to be possible to continue with work on the site, but there may be other ways in which we can handle matters. So to cut a long story very short, what I am suggesting is that there is, yes, an important role for the engineer to make sure that the contract is applied in accordance with its terms, but there is this new, more proactive role. Some engineers have been following this for decades already, but it now is down in black and white. And that, I hope, going forward with this crisis and with others in the future, will be something which will really help all involved in the project deal with it in the best possible manner and give less dispute board and arbitration work to people like me. So I think I need to stop there, Nelson, and we move on to other perspectives.
Thank you very much, David. That's quite interesting because, I mean, considering that you said you spent all your life, you know, being in a dispute relation business, but you quite clearly identify the two sides. One is about the reactive side and various clauses that may come up in dispute, and you are signposting and asking the question, which one is going to be contentious in future? And we need to be mindful of that, which I think is quite right. But actually, you're also saying the new FIDIC document actually is changing the role of the engineer from being reactive to be a collaborator, you know, a facilitator, and a mediator to bring solution, particularly with COVID, which I think is quite interesting. I want to move on across now to look at, you know, how companies who are operating in the multidisciplinary sector and operating in different world, a different geography, how they're treating the world of COVID in terms of their responsibility. So I'm going to invite Pierre Verzat at this point from Systra, who's CEO of Systra, to give us his view on the subject. So Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nelson. Hello, everybody. As all of us, we are locked down somewhere. I'm locked down in France, in the countryside, and my first thought was for the more than 70,000 people already died in France. Hopefully, Systra is employing more than 7,000 employees, and only 2 of them are currently in bad situation at the hospital, but not completely life in danger. But certainly, at the end of this crisis, we will lose some beloved people. So let us think about that. It's giving some sense of reality. I'm not a specialist of legal issues and FIDIC contracts, so I was impressed by the the former speakers. But now I would like to talk about what is happening in the real life. And yes, the real life is very more collaborative. And today, what I feel within my company and other colleagues, it's not a big pressure on contracts. Maybe it will come, but today we are more in a hurry to cooperate with the clients and the contractors in order to rescue what can be rescued, to restart what can be restarted, and to continue to deliver as much as possible. I would say globally that we Systra, we operate on one single segment, which is transportation infrastructure, but worldwide, in any part of the world, Australia, Asia, Middle East, Northern America, Brazil, of course, France and UK, and Nordics. And I would say in two types of operation, design and on-site project management contract. On design side, first of all, it has been quite easy to move everybody to work from home. Internet is working almost everywhere, and even in India, we have been able to transfer most of our workforce, including BIM modelers with heavy calculation tools at home. Of course, after you have an issue of efficiency, depending on the availability of internet, and it's a main concern in India, for example, where we're losing around 25% of productivity. But even in France or in Europe, you can lose productivity due to the conditions. You are working at home in your kitchen with your children. It's not so efficient, and it's lasting weeks and weeks. We are currently in the 5th week in France, and the horizon is to spend more than 2 months at home with your wife, with your family, with your dog. It could be a mess quite quickly, and in terms of efficiency, not so efficient. Of course, we can have some staff shortage because some of them are sick due to the COVID or due to mental health issue also. Pay attention to that. And in front of us, the issue is to the availability of our clients. They have also issue of internet connection, work from home, staff availability due to sickness, lack of efficiency, and maybe they were less used to compared to us to be connected and to work on connected network and to proactively work with using only IT tools with the paperless mode. So it's particularly true for public clients. They have some difficulties sometimes to approve contracts or to approve variation order or to even approve invoices. It's not the case today, but it will raise quite quickly the issue of what about on time base, can we charge every hours? Can we charge this loss of efficiency of 20%? Who will pay for that? Is the client truly ready to pay for that? And of course, when we are facing lump sum contract, especially in design and build frame, who will pay for the extra work? Globally, we feel some benevolence from our clients. They are pushy to help us. Yes, everywhere around the world, even in Middle East, in America, they are relatively kind in the way they are treating the engineers and the way we can continue to deliver despite the difficulty to be on site, to work on in integrated plateau, for example, and they accept nevertheless invoices. But if it is lasting too long, we'll start to have some issues knowing that our clients are almost bankrupt if they are public clients because the debt is growing and growing. On site management and project management contract, it's another issue. I would say that maybe 20–30% of the world is still moving on. It depends from one country to another one. In France, everything is almost blocked, but the government is pushing like hell since 4 weeks to restart the work, bringing the appropriate health and safety rules, guidelines, means like face masks and sanitizers, of course. In other countries where there is a severe lockdown, the work on site is still ongoing, sometimes with some measures. Sometimes we gain the authorization to work remotely, to be less present on site, which could raise some issue in terms of accountability, in terms of legal responsibility, and even in terms of duty of care for our own employees if they are moving to a site. And how can we manage that? That's the main concern. But I have the feeling that for our industry, work on site will restart more easily because we feel that packing thousands of engineers in one building, taking the metro to come, it's difficult, but to work on construction supervision, it's easier to manage social distanciation, it's easier to manage use of masks, sanitizers, and stuff like that. So, except in some conditions, like in tunneling, for example, but apart that, I think it will be easier to restart or to proceed quite almost normally. The main concern will be the health and safety accountability, but in terms of contractual condition, in terms of efficiency, it's not so much damaging. The last issue for us is, of course, to not have the machine completely blocked, because yes, there is a legal clause, but the first threat is insolvency for clients and even the insolvency of our own company, because the cash is burned very fast when nobody is working. So today we are burning maybe 20–30% of our capacity, which is not working. And in some companies, some colleagues, it's more than 50% with blocked. And for a service company, just not affordable more than 1 or 2 months. So it's the major risk for us is mainly cash in and invoicing. And this is where I feel some positive mood from the client, from the government, everywhere, in order to keep the system going on, to make it simple. Yes, there is contract. Yes, there are real rules. Most of the governments, they are issuing specific extraordinary laws or change of laws to help the system to keep on going. Okay, there is a cost, but the cost of the system blocked is far more higher. So everybody is ready to lose some money, but to keep it ongoing. And even in Middle East, we faced some contract where the client was more than kind to help us to invoice, even if the people are ill, to really maintain the pace of the contract without too much contractual considerations. That's my main feedback. I think my time is over, Nelson, but this is the feedback from an transport infrastructure engineering company. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, very insightful. I mean, I like the way you pick it up. I mean, your business, even though it's specialized in transportation and has global reach, the distinction between site and the design work and the risk that goes with that, those are interesting there to see how you package that. It'd be interesting when we talk to James and Andrew, how they see that. I want to bring James in from the standpoint that, James is a small, not a large company, but it would be interesting to see how they see things in a particular country of operation, and also maybe we give us an insight to what the government in that country are doing. But more important, is the pain the same? Is your approach to dealing with the COVID-19 the same as much as large firm? James, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nelson. Those who are participating.
James, can you speak close to the microphone, please?
Right, can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely, much better now. Thank you.
Okay, so I just said thank you very much, Nelson, and your team. Really appreciate FIDIC putting together this webinar. A lot of good exchange, a lot of useful insights from the previous speakers. Now, from Africa, COVID-19 has been...
We're losing you, James. Can you get back close to the microphone, please? Thank you.
Okay, I'm close again. This pandemic has been unprecedented. Many firms in Africa, including contractors, are small, meaning that they don't have robust management systems. They are limited in IT infrastructure in some cases. Many of them do not have strong financial strength. And what we are seeing is that when COVID was announced, when we had cases in Africa, many of the players have found themselves grappling, especially contractors. Now, just to put it into perspective, in Africa, many of the processes tend to be manual, labor intensive. When we had this pandemic and the government directives on health, we have seen reduced workforces. We have seen difficulties in people getting to work. we have seen unpreparedness in terms of personal protective equipment, and also the fact that the government's pronouncements, in as far as budgets are concerned, have listed construction as a non-essential service.
James, can you keep close to the microphone, please, James? We hardly can hear you. Keep close to the microphone. Thank you.
I'm trying to be as close as possible.
Thank you.
I'm just saying that in as far as government is concerned, we have seen budgets being diverted from infrastructure to other essential services. So the role of the engineer becomes very critical. In the project, he is the central figure in terms of collecting information as it unfolds.
James, please keep close to the microphone, James. We hardly can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm actually very close. I think my line is a little bit bad, but I'll try and finish quickly. I'm just saying the engineer is playing a key role in making sure that all parties are of the development, especially government pronouncements. The engineer is
We lost you altogether now, James. I'm sorry about this. We are struggling in that.
Oh, sorry. Then maybe let me just say that the engineer is playing a very important role in making sure that all parties know what is unfolding and what measures that they can take to try and make that project continue. I think I'll stop there because of the bad connection.
Okay, thank you very much, James. I appreciate the difficulties. We can easily get carried away sometimes thinking the world is all the same in terms of technology. I think as much as we struggle to connect China, it seems like we are struggling to get James on. But James, good to have you on board. I wish you can actually just maintain, because I might need to bring you back into Q&A. Hopefully we can have you in. Can I take that opportunity and bring Andrew Reid in from New Zealand? Andrew, about the same size as James, but you're looking at it from Australasia point of view. It'd be good to get a perspective as to how you see the situation from the role of the engineer, what the government is doing, and what you think the rules and the regulations allow you to do, and how generally the clients and the various parties are coming to play to find a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson, and apologies, James, that we couldn't hear more of you. So I'm based in New Zealand. We're fortunate at the moment that we hopefully have good internet. I'll give you 4 words that for me capture the role that I think we have as engineers. One is uncertainty, communication, safety, and the final one is leadership. And uncertainty probably sums up what most of us have felt and are feeling about the situation that we're in. We're not sure where we're going to go, how we're going to get through this, for some of us, whether we'll survive, and more importantly, how some of the things will pan out in the environment that we're working in. And I think as long as we as engineers on contracts, and also as engineers within businesses, understand that uncertainty is something that we need to be aware of in assessing our contracts and assessing our people's ability to respond to the situation that they're in. Talk about communication, and this has been mentioned by a couple of the previous presenters. We need to communicate with all of the parties to our contracts more than we would normally do. They're uncertain about the environment that they're in. Yes, we have great contracts, the FIDIC contracts. We have similar contracts in New Zealand where we have an engineer to the contract whose role, in my words, is to act in the best interests of the contract, not focus on their client who's paying their bill, but work in the interests of the contract. And that's sort of the underlying principle for FIDIC's contracts as well. We need to communicate that we don't know. We need to communicate that we're not quite sure how some of the provisions in the contract might pan out, and ideally work a way to a solution with the contractor, with the consulting parties, and with the client together. I mentioned safety, and I mentioned safety rather than health, because the bad outcome if we get this wrong is people will die. So this is a health impact that has an immediate pass through. It may not be you, but it may be your family or someone else that could be adversely affected. And thinking about safety, we may have great procedures for people getting back onto site, but we need workers not just to be safe, but to feel safe. And that's quite a different dynamic. Different people will be reacting in quite different ways. So this comes to my final word to try and capture some of the things that I'm seeing, and that's leadership. Very much in the contracts, the engineer to the contract is the leader, the guider, the person that works between the client and the contractor to help move things forward. I think we've got to be careful not to be self-serving, and that's certainly not a part of the role under the FIDIC contract and many contracts around the world. We are seen as the professionals. We need to act and behave and consider more than just what we might normally do on a contract. We need to encourage the parties to talk about their concerns around COVID-19. We need to guide them through a process in a way that maybe we wouldn't have had to do in the past. I would argue that many engineers are better than a lot of health professionals at analysing data and considering the potential implications of systems and managing risk. And as leaders, we need to do that. We're seeing that in New Zealand. We're seeing collaboration between government, consultants, contractors, so that we can try and find not just a way of working, but a new way of working in a world that we believe will be considerably different, not for a month or 2 months or 6 months, but for a year or 2 years. So out of that comes how do we deal with COVID-19, but also the aspects of how can we capture some of the things that are better about the world in terms of sustainability, cleaner and greener environment, because we're in complete lockdown, and see if we can introduce those into the way that we deliver projects. So that's a short overview. One final point, Nelson. Just remember that small firms don't have a health and safety department. Small firms don't have spare resource ready and available to act on behalf of COVID-19 issues. So they may understand the problems. They need help from organisations like FIDIC and their member associations. So all you big firms out there, just remember that the small firms may need a helping hand occasionally. Thank you, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was a very nice way to wrap up. I mean, I do take the point you're making. Just for those who are following this interesting webinar, please sharpen your pencil and prepare to throw the question as the panel in a few minutes once I finish starting up with them. Andrew, just to sum up, I like your 4 point of uncertainty, communication, safety, and leadership. And you close out on the issue about the role of the SME and the lack of the various departmental, but actually a call to arm that the SME is equally important to keep the industry sustainable, and there may be an opportunity for collaboration between the small and the large firm, regardless of where you find yourself within the supply chain. I'm going to put questions across to individual. I do know that some questions are flowing through. But I know if I can just start by saying, both James and Andrew, you came across in the issue of the small to medium size. And if I look across our own industry, to be honest, while there's quite a number of large firms, the makeup of the regional businesses are the real and small to medium sized firm. So it's important that I start with you and James, Andrew. So my first question to you is, in this difficult environment, knowing fully that what you've advocated in your paper is that the role of the engineer as a leader is critical. There is always a question about the engineer being biased because you are being paid by the client. But yet the way FIDIC goes about, it says engineers has a role. And I remember David in his well-articulated message was, the way that FIDIC now put itself forward is not in the reactive mode, but actually in a sort of proactive role. And your message about leadership seems to link very well in that. How do you strike that balance? And this is a question to all of you. How did you strike that balance between trying to be the, what I call the umpire, knowing fully that you are being paid by the client in this difficult position, whilst on one hand, there may be a view that you need to protect the interest of your client, but on the other hand, FIDIC is imposing on you that you need to be a leader, you need to be a mediator, you need to be, the consoler, you need to bring everybody together. I'm playing back to you now, Andrew, all the words you said to me, you need to be able to guide and put people together. How do you do that in that particular difficult position without being seen to be biased? And this question goes to every candidate on the panel. So let me start, and I need a simple sentence from you, Andrew. And
Nelson.
Yes. Okay.
Look, that's a really good question. For me, it underpins what it means to truly be a professional engineer and to act as a consulting engineer. So you may be struggling to retain a client, you may want to do your best for the client, but at the end of the day, we are engaged as an engineer to a contract, and we're supporting the contract. So we shouldn't have this conversation in normal times. I suspect some consulting firms might be stressed because they might be losing clients. Now's the time to stand tall and do what we should be doing proudly, which is acting in the best interests of the contract. That's what we're engaged to do. That's what we're for. So for me, it's a matter of hats. Take your company's hat off, put the role of the contract hat on.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'm going to go through across to David, because again, you both are actually in alignment and in sync, and I'm going to come to Vincent later on. David, you raised the issue in your paper by saying that there's the role for being reactive, and that's very much knowing which clauses may come into play later on, particularly when it comes to dispute, and one need to know which one you need to trigger. But you actually said the 2017 document put the engineer in the same manner as what Andrew articulated. How do you think one can play that role and exercise that particular duty under the new FIDIC document that can give you that independent and unbiased view? David, the floor is yours. Have we lost David?
I've just come back. How can he play that role and be unbiased? It's extremely difficult. The trouble is, and especially under the FIDIC yellow and red books, he is paid by the employer in principle. Funding may come from some other entity, but still, it's a very difficult role to play. But that is the role that has to be played. How can I put it? I only see the cases where things really go wrong. There must be many projects where he does manage to play that role pretty well. But as I was saying, I think there's almost a sort of collaborative relationship between the parties at the very start. The kickoff meeting, everybody's very happy. They all go to the pub afterwards. That's fine. It's just trying to keep that relationship going throughout. Yes, there will be problems. That's the great unique nature of these projects. But it is a big issue as to how you keep that going. You just have to keep communicating, as Andrew was saying. There's one aspect I didn't have time to mention, and I'll do it very quickly, is this is not just a marriage with three parties, employer, contractor, and the engineer. Under the new FIDICs, you've got the dispute board as well, and they're supposed to be there now from the very start. And that is an aspect that will need to be worked on. If they're going to be coming to the site every 3 or 4 months and having involvement, then they somehow need to be incorporated into this overall picture, and can only help very much in the overall role of trying to avoid disputes. Called dispute boards, but they are, as all dispute board members will say, their real aim in life is to avoid anybody sending them disputes. They're very keen to work with everybody to avoid them. So the fact that you've got this completely independent entity there as well, that I think may actually help in a way the engineer perform his role in a more independent way. He will say to the employer, okay, you know, you might want me to do this, but if I do it, then the dispute board is going to disagree with what I do. So I've got to act in a completely independent way. I may be being slightly optimistic there, but that is the whole scheme now set up under FIDIC, and hopefully it's going to work.
Thank you very much, David. I'm going to bring Vincent in on the same issue. I think what I heard from David is actually, I like the approach you've taken. You've always said you are very much coming back from the dispute side of it, but moving the game into the dispute avoidance. And so the question to Vincent is, you know, how effectively can people leverage on the dispute board during this period to actually make sure that we avoid potential litigation and arbitration or adjudication down the line? Vincent, would you come on board on this particular question for me?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, regarding the dispute board, as you may all well know, that is a very unique feature that we have in our forms of contract, and especially with the 2017 suite, we have now a very much fully fledged dispute avoidance approach that the parties, employer and contractor can consider. So you can recourse to your dispute avoidance adjudication board in the 2017 suite. You can ask the DAB for opinions, for advices regarding the way to handle the current situation. So that's under clause 21. You can in particular refer to 21.3. If you are working under former forms, like the 99 edition, in your red book, you have subclause 20.2, which allows you to go to the dispute board so as to seek for their opinion. If it's a 3-member dispute board, but of course the same with a 1-member dispute board. So the dispute board, they have a clear set out obligation to be independent and impartial from the parties, and they can help you out actually on a live mode to prevent things and difficulties to come disputes down the line. So they have a double hat, dispute avoidance hat, dispute resolution hat. But I would again stress very much the role of the engineer. In this respect, we tend to forget sometimes that the engineer is somehow the first level of dispute avoidance, in the sense that he is there to try to broker a deal in between the parties. I hear very well that it might be difficult for the engineer to have a fair view on things, or to make fair determinations as it is prescribed in our contract. This is the same whole debate that we have been having for years about how can you expect the engineer to take a fair view of things while he's being paid at the same time by the employer. And I would have 3 answers to that. It all depends on your law, on your practices and your relations. If you have the support of your law, like in the UK, for instance, I'm thinking of case law like Sutcliffe and Takra, or Kosten-Bechdel, that's clear cases which show that the law is expecting an engineer to be making fair certification or fair determination. So that's a support for engineers working in those environments. If you are looking at perspectives like mine in France, the role of the engineer is less central, less prominent than in this respect of contract administration than in the UK, for instance. And it would be expected that the employer is taking the main decisions, but nevertheless, if you have a trust relation with your engineer, then can perfectly well work okay. I'm also taking examples of employers. I'm thinking about a private employer. Sometimes they staff by themselves the person acting as the engineer. And it's not because someone from the employer's organization is acting as an engineer or just acting as employer's representative that necessarily that person will be biased against the contractor. There are also long-term interests of the employer who may just say it might be better for me at this point in time to take a fair decision rather than to try to have a hardline approach which would ultimately only result in disputes, time and associated costs, and which would not be in my long-term interest for my project. So, you know, it's always, I tend to have to avoid taking too black and white approaches or simplistic views on this. It all depends on those 3 matters, I think: law, practices, and the actual relations you have on the job sites.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vincent. I'm going to tap into Leloup now, and also Pierre Verzat. Lou, in your presentation earlier on, again, the same theme that keep coming out of the conversation is this collaborative issue. You were ahead of the game in terms of the COVID-19, and rumor has it that you are totally out of it. And you talk about collaboration between the client, the contractors, and the engineer in playing that role. Has that been done because of the peculiarity in China? Because the government probably have stake in all the contracting company and everything is linked up, or is it just does it just gravitize and it's a natural issue between the various stakeholders to take this collaborative approach and find a solution and move things forward? What lesson can we learn from that, Lou? Can you unmute, please? Thank you.
Yeah, of course, I think from my experience, this is a much more efficiency approach for, let's say, contractor, employer, engineer working together, especially on such a, let's say, COVID-19 crisis. This is not only, let's say, applied for those, let's say, public sector projects, government-owned projects. Not also, it works for some, let's say, private projects, private invested projects. This maybe I think this maybe it's the culture. Maybe it's quite difficult to, let's say, identify why we let's say select this approach. But officially, this is quite let's say efficient, especially to handle some, let's say, exceptional events and some crisis here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lou. Pierre, I mean, can I bring you back in? Your business is all over the world, and you cited that you're doing work in Australasia, in America, in UK, everywhere. Your collaborative approach of trying to work with various parties, do you think because you are a specialist in transport sector, or do you feel that that same approach seems to work? Do you have any geographical differences in your approach in different areas? Pierre, Verzat?
Yes, I think it's not linked to specific geographic, because it's one of the first time we are truly, all of us around the planet in the same mess, worse than the Second World War. So everybody has a feeling that the life will not be the same at the end. That means that we cannot just play with the usual rules, with the usual legal dispute, even if there is a nice organization within FIDIC contract. Because at the end, the risk is to have some of the players just absent because they are insolvent. And so at the end, you need to keep all the balls in the air. And that's why sometimes you need to be collaborative and to be flexible. It's a very pragmatic approach. And we know that in China, they are very pragmatic. If you want to be pragmatic and to make most of your contracts surviving and most of your activity surviving, you cannot go too much into the details of the contracts, because if you start to play that game, you will stop everything. And it's not affordable for the planet. So you are forced to keep moving, even if the contract is not the good one. And we have the feeling that in every part of the planet, today, we are in the middle of the crisis, but today, that's the game that every country is playing. With helicopter money coming, everybody wants to sustain the system. So let us play this collaborative spirit everywhere, because it's the only way, on average, the total benefit for the planet will be the highest doing like that, I think.
Thanks very much, Pierre. And I'm now going to start picking up the question from the floor. For those who are participating, who are putting questions to me, I'm going to do my best to try and capture the essence of your question. But please do me a favor, keep your questions short and straight to the point. Don't give me a series of sub-clauses question, because we are not providing legal advice. So I would suggest on those matters, please refer back to your lawyer. But just starting on the first question, this is a generic question. What if the engineer itself becomes unavailable and unwilling to supervise the work because of the COVID, but the contractor wants to continue work and is unwilling to negotiate mutual suspension under 2019 or 1999 suit of contract? So how do you get out of that? If you are the engineer and you don't want to supervise, but the contractor wants to continue because you feel either for health and safety, because your staff are not available, how do you deal with that? I mean, again, we are not giving any specific advice. This is a scenario, and I wonder who wants to take a play on that. David, do you want to take a play or punt on that?
I was worried you might ask me that. I was trying to think and quickly turning the pages. There must be an obligation somewhere for the employer to ensure that there's an engineer in place. I'm not quite sure where it is at the moment. I think Vincent might be the best person who can come in quickly on this while I'm having a quick look around.
Okay, Vincent, do you feel you can, plug in on this, Vincent?
Yeah, there is an obligation under clause 3.1 for in the 2017 books or 99 for the employer to appoint the engineer, and we shall carry out the duties assigned to him under the contract. So there is an obligation there to have an engineer in place. But again, whether that engineer is a separate entity from the employer's organization or not is not necessarily tackled there. So you can well be in a situation where if your third-party engineer, a consulting engineering firm, is refusing to carry on working for whatever reason, that does not necessarily mean under the contract terms that the whole project is supposed to be put on hold. There might be legal implications, for instance, saying that in such a context you cannot continue carrying out the works. That might be looked at. But under the strict terms of the contract, the employer would be under the obligation to nominate someone to act as the engineer. And so the ultimate question for the employer is that is he feeling equipped to deal with that role, even on an interim basis? Does he have the resources in terms of number and capacity to handle the continuation of the works? That's kind of questions to think of, I would say.
Thanks very much, Vincent. The next question is actually coming from Rehan Zamin, and this is to all the panel, but I'll probably put it to those panel who haven't spoken. Again, we're not expecting legal advice, just your opinion on how people should deal with it. The question is how to determine claims raised due to COVID-19, as it is going to be difficult. Which clause of FIDIC do you use? Especially, we've talked about it earlier, and I just wonder, any particular guidance you can, which clause do you use if it's to do with COVID-19? Any particular clause? I suspect you probably say it depends on the circumstances and all the issue that goes with that, Vincent. Is that what you answer? I can see you coming with that.
Yeah, of course, but that's, by the way, that's something that will be addressed in an upcoming FIDIC guidance memorandum that we will publish about how to deal with the situation under our forms. But if you are looking at the works contract perspective, as David rightfully mentioned before, you have to look at, of course, clause 19, force majeure in 99 edition, or 18, exceptional event in 2017. But that's not necessarily the most direct way forward. In fact, you have to look at 13.7 in 99, 13.6 in 2017 edition for changes in law, which can be very much relevant. And also subclause 8.5D or 8.4D in the 99 edition, 8.5 in 2017, for unforeseeable shortages caused by epidemic or governmental action. But that's on the work side. Think, of course, about your claim notification duties under clause 20, the time you have to deliver your claim, the contemporary records you need to keep. Otherwise, it's difficult to justify and substantiate your cost down the line. And on the consultant side, if you are working under the white book, think about looking at clause 1.5, changes in legislation. Think about looking at clause 4.6, exceptional event, 4.4 for the extension of time associated to that, 7.2 also for the dealing with the exceptional cost, and also variations to the services, because you may argue that all these special measures that you have now, the disruption you suffer from, your people are working away from the site, they're working from home, etc. This disruption impact can well be tackled through clause 5 for variation to the services, giving rise to entitlement for cost and time as well. The question was about FIDIC 92. I don't know whether it was a typo, because FIDIC 92, we had a supplement to the Red Book 87 in 92, but that's about it. Apart from that, FIDIC 92 was a quiet year on the contract side.
Well, I saw that, I just ignored that. I suspect one general question, which I suspect already been answered, is the question, I think it goes back to what Andrew was saying about leadership. And the question goes along that, is the role of the consulting engineer now more important on project than in normal circumstances? Maybe by definition, it's already been answered. I mean, do you genuinely feel the role of the engineer is now more important under the COVID-19 than ever, particularly in the issue about being the mediator, the collaborator, the one that brings everybody together? Can I put that to, Pierre Verzat? Yeah. Pierre, are you there?
Sorry, I just forget to press the button. Yes, it's a matter of leadership. It's true. And it's a current position I play in my professional life is when there is a need, because in general, the job of the CEO is to work when there is an issue with a client. In general, the planning is out, the budget is cancelled or burned, everything is going wrong. And so you are you are entering into the playground. And in general, our role is really a role of leadership and in the role of giving the good direction and to help employers and contractors to find a fair solution. As I said, in such a situation, in such a circumstances, there is no other way than to find a win-win solution because nobody is responsible for that. Nobody is responsible for COVID-19. It's like a war. It's something falling on our heads, and that's it. And so everybody in the same positive mood to try to find a collaborative way of stepping out of this issue. So I think that yes, the role is really to install this spirit of collaboration and to have a strong leadership. And in general, we are listened to because the engineer is a third party of confidence, somebody who has to generate confidence between the parties. So if we are properly playing this role, I think it will help.
Okay, thanks very much. I just wonder whether I can bring James back in if you're still online. James, one of the issues you raised earlier on is about, and I think this was also raised by Andrew, the structure of the consulting engineering in Africa. I think whilst you're looking at your country, but you're looking generically, but actually you could actually apply the same principle in some Middle East, you know. Are you saying because of that structure means that the ability of the consulting firm to respond was sort of being diminished in Africa? And if that's the case, what do you see coming through as lesson to be learned in future, perhaps when you are working in collaboration with other international consulting firms who are operating in that country? James, the question is to you. If you're able to connect with us, keep close to the microphone.
Okay, thank you very much, Nelson. Certainly, collaboration between local firms and international firms can help enhance capacity. And capacity means that the firms are able to respond better. They can have better systems. And I'll tell you that ultimately they're able to lobby even better. We find that in Africa, a lot of the firms don't have a lot of strength, as I said. And maybe something else that I wanted to bring to the fore on the impartiality of the consulting engineer. In Africa, there is a lot of pressure for the engineer not to be impartial. And I think we need to develop codes of conduct, inculcate those codes, and have firms supporting the engineers to be independent. Granted that in some cases, the project engineer in some government projects is actually an employee of the government. And you'll find that the engineer from the consulting firm is an engineer representative, and that presents a big challenge in terms of impartiality. So partnership bring better alignment, bring better capacity, and bring better response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, for that insight. I'm being put more questions coming through from the floor. Some of them are very specific. There are questions on the floor saying, can we guarantee that we will make a copy of this video available? Yes, the answer is that. There's quite a number of that question coming through. After this particular session, there will be a copy of that being available for people to download, to play again, and to catch up on missed points that's come through. A few questions again that I've just picked up here is about, I think the question goes like, how can FIDIC help consulting engineers to better deliver their services, overcome the crisis, meet the industry expectation, and meet a new reality? I'm going to put this across into Pierre Verzat, please. Pierre, can you put that in?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The question is, how can FIDIC help consulting engineers to better deliver their services, overcome this crisis, and meet the industry expectation, and meet a new reality. Now, if you can just, while you're thinking about that, Pierre, is you will know that FIDIC's already put some guidance note out, and we've been doing a weekly, update. And I think Vincent also alluded that there will be a publication tomorrow, which is about a guide on, particularly on the issue to do with contract. So the question is, beside what we are doing, what else can FIDIC be doing to help you guys to deliver a business that is better, fit for the future, and ready to overcome the COVID-19 challenges?
Yes, I think that on top of helping us to manage the contractual issue and to properly apply the FIDIC clauses, and it's a very good job which has been done, and the more standard rule we have, the more efficient it will be. I think we will need guidelines for managing and I've seen that there is many questions about PMC, how can we perform PMC if there is lockdown and stuff like that. So, and I experienced that in France, facing the lockdown and proposing some rules on behalf of Syntec Ingénierie or local association. And I think that if FIDIC can help also us at global level to propose some standard rules on how we can perform PMC during a lockdown period and how we can step out of the confinement period with specific health and safety rules or specific waivers on the classical PMC duties during this period, it could help, because there is question about how can we charge time-based if we are not on site and stuff like that. So I think it could be interesting to have some standard rules, some standard waivers to the PMC contract in order to help the engineers to propose something which is fair and honest to the employer. And by experience, having experienced that in France, if you have something coming from an authority, even if it is a recommendation from Syntec Ingénierie, it's easily endorsed by both parties as a fair way of managing this crisis. So yes, if there is some guidelines, and that was one of my personal questions, how can we get some guidelines from FIDIC on that point?
Okay, thank you very much. Andrew, you are the chair of the FIDIC Best Business Practice. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I do know that, Vincent and his team on CC, they are doing a lot to come through. What is your response? What do you think we should be doing that we haven't already been doing?
So can I say, Nelson, congratulations on your chief executive notices that are coming out. I think they're excellent. Congratulations on the webinar series. The one thing I think we bring to the problem, this problem that the world is facing, is a way to analyze problems and help deliver projects. So I'd like to encourage FIDIC, and I know you're already doing this, to look outside of the projects that we're involved in at the moment and talk to governments, offer assistance to governments. Engineers are great at delivering projects, and for many countries to get them back up on their feet again, they're going to need infrastructure projects to get people back and employed. It may be a long time before we travel as we were before, but I think if FIDIC can look less in and more out and give help to the World Banks and the multilateral development banks and help member associations to do what you're doing, and that's provide guidance to their members and guidance in particular to local and central governments. But well done in what the efforts that you're doing at the moment.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that. I just wonder, particularly, I've got Lou here, who is vice president of FIDIC. I mean, this is not about singing our praise, it's about what else can we do, because I do know, having run an association for 14 years, that at local level, there's all sorts of challenges. In New Zealand, I'm talking to our friend Paul Evans on what he's doing out there. And the first webinar we had was all MA, CEO discussing the issue. So the point you raised there, Andrew, is quite valid. And I just wonder, Lou, what's your take on that? Beside, providing guidance note, advocacy, I think that's the word that I'm looking for. Advocacy at government level, and supporting member association to make sure they're fit for future and they're able to move forward. Lou, any other point you wish to add on to that point?
So for this issue, I think that's definitely for FIDIC as the Federation of International Consultants, advocacy is quite essential, important for us. we are, let's say, the best practice producer, and we need to advocate this to all our stakeholders, to the government, to the MAs, and of course, there's numerous tasks, especially for a secretariat and the board. We need to think about how to improve our current, let's say, the approaches, actions, and frameworks we developed, how to continue to improve the advocacy function to our stakeholders.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lou. Before I bring the president back, this is very unusual. Normally, I don't bring the president back to summarize, but I'm going to give him the opportunity in a minute or two. I just want that if I go around other panelists and said, if there is one sentence of advice or things we think we should be covering, bearing in mind that we've still got 16 other, webinar plan, topic that should be on our lips in view of all the points that's been raised, is an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to start off with David, and I'll go around, and after that, I will invite Bill to say a few words just to wrap up. Thank you very much. So David, what do you think we should be looking at? I know you are coming in from the issue of dispute resolution, but you've touched about the dispute avoidance side of it. From your perspective, what else should we be looking at in the future with coming from?
Well, what I would say in this specific situation is you're going to have the parties, especially the contractor, with lots of claims, potential claims, lots of notices, lots of things to do. Yes, he has to get that all down on paper. He has to comply with the contract, but give the engineer a ring, go and see him, say, look, I've got to send you and the employer these letters. Let's sit down and let's talk about it. And that for me is part of the whole thing, to find a way forward. And that gets in with the whole thing that you was talking about, collaborative culture, and also gets in with the leadership aspect that Andrew was talking about. The engineer has to give leadership, and he can do this if he really understands and has a good working relationship with the contractor and the other party.
Thank you very much for that. Very insightful. I'm going to go to Pierre. What is your one sentence advice or topic we should be looking at, going forward? Pierre, Verzat?
Yes, listening to you, all of you, has a feeling that if we are not paying attention, we'll be engaged in an incredible, massive amount of dispute, this reconciliation, and it will not be manageable. There is no enough law court around the world to manage all the dispute we will have. So we have really to think about a massive simplification of the process of dispute resolving and standard resolving clauses if we want not to overload all our system, or we will spend 10 years to treat all the dispute we are generating due to the COVID crisis. That's my fear now.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think I hear you loud and clear. Can I just take undue advantage and ask James, any word of advice on what else we should be looking at going forward? James?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nelson. I think it points at the opportunity for more FIDIC training to enhance FIDIC competencies, especially in the developing world. Number two, it shows the importance of having the DAAB, especially in this kind of unforeseen circumstances. Number three, this presents an opportunity for FIDIC to demonstrate the robustness of the FIDIC contracts when it comes to the choice of the FIDIC contract. So I think that there will be positive things coming out of this for FIDIC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. On that note, I'm just going to try. I think I haven't missed anybody out. I've done Lou. I've done, Vincent. Sorry, my good friend, Vincent. Your word of advice, apart from telling us once again that the guidance note is coming out tomorrow, and be ready for it. So what is the other word you want to say, Vincent?
Yeah, probably just to keep a holistic view in mind for this kind of situation, not to have a fragmented one, meaning by that, not to have only a contractual view of things, not to have only a legal view of things, but also to keep in mind the social impact that this situation is having, the business impact, and I think all of us as consulting engineers, we are well used to deal with holistic matters. So when we prepare infrastructure or building project, we look at the economic, financial side of things, environmental, social, the technical side, of course. And I think this is what we need to keep in mind to successfully deal with this situation.
Okay, thank you very much, Vincent. I did say it's very unusual for me to call the president back, but we are lucky to have him. So I'm going to take due advantage and say, you know, Bill, do you want to just wrap up very quickly, and I will then try and summarize before we move out. Bill?
Well, thank you very much, Nelson. And one of the themes that I heard in this webinar is very similar to the ones we've heard in the other three, and that is the importance of communication and quality relationships with all the stakeholders involved in the projects, being honest and trying to be fair and recognizing that we're all in this together. One of the themes that come up, with your permission, Nelson, I'd like to spend about 30 seconds on, maybe a touch more, is the whole issue of the engineer is paid by one entity in a project, i.e. the client or the owner. Therefore, they struggle to meet the obligation of being fair to all parties. We've heard this issue, at least I have, over and over again since I started my career. It's not a new issue. It'll probably be more emphatic as we get into resolving some of the claims and extensions of time requests, etc. But in responding to that question of how can we be independent and fair when someone else is paying us, my answer to that, or when one party is paying us, is we are not advocates. We are professional engineers. In many countries, we are obligated, number one, to represent or to look out for the public welfare as opposed to our own welfare and our clients. And that sounds good, but it still is our professional obligation. Beyond the professional obligation, the other point I would make to someone who is tempted perhaps to be not fair and overly represent the client's interest is eventually everyone will lose, including the client and the engineer. The dispute adjudication board will catch it, and if they don't, it'll be into very expensive litigation, and eventually everyone will lose. So it is in everyone's interest that the engineer be as fair and unbiased on situations as they possibly can. It's in everyone's interest. And if you haven't known already, that's something that is very near and dear to my heart. So I apologize for getting on a soapbox for a little bit, but it's a very, very important point. The other thing I would say about it is that some of the, quote, selling points of construction managers and program managers coming into massive projects is that the engineer sometimes cannot or is tempted not to be quite so fair, because of who is paying them. And I've heard sometimes a pushback on that a quote independent manager consultant sometimes can be can have their own issues of temptations and fairness, et cetera. So there's no perfect way of dealing with these problems. But again, I'll just close with the engineer is obligated as a professional to be honest and fair. And I'm sorry I took up so much time on that, but
thank you very much.
It's an issue near and dear to my heart. Thank you.
Really appreciate that. Thank you. On this note, I need to say that we try to finish on time. We are about 3 minutes over, which I apologize profoundly. But let me start some thank you. Thank you to the president. Thank you to our vice president, our eminent, stallion speakers. Thank you for your time and energy, preparation towards this. Thank you to all the participants, wherever you are. Be safe, play safe. And I thank you for taking the time to join us. And thank you to the FIDIC team who are working from home to make this thing happen. Barbara in particular, Andy who's going to be there, Doduna who are all in there, and Nadia who is on the social media. Thank you very much for all your contribution. I do want to finish up with the 3 or 4 words. and I nicked this, and I'm not making any apology. I hear the word uncertainty, I hear the word communication, I hear the word safety, and I hear the word leadership. But more important, a holistic collaborative solution. On that note, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to you joining us next week, Tuesday, on the 24th. We'll be looking at the issue about insurance coverage, what security is provided for liability and interoperation. So please find the time to join us next week. On that note, thank you very much. All the very best. Be safe. Keep safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson.
Thank you.